Sustainability Karma, a podcast series on sustainable development, sustainability, and ESG, or environmental, social, and governance. In this podcast series, with senior journalist and editor Rajiv Tikoo, a who's who of thought leaders from the government, private sector, and civil society share their mantra for accelerating development in India and making the world a better place.
Namaskar. Welcome to this episode of Sustainability Karma. I'm Rajiv Tikoo. Today we talk about the remarkable progress India has made on reducing multidimensional poverty. In a span of 15 years, 415 million people or 41.5 crore people have moved out of multidimensional poverty, according to a recent report. It's mainly about progress in health, education, and living standards. In today's episode of Sustainability Karma, we talk to United Nations Resident Coordinator, Shombi Sharp. He leads the United Nations efforts for advancement of sustainable development and eradication of poverty in India. Welcome, Shombi Sharp.
Well, thank you, Rajiv. First of all, let me just say, mujhe yahan bulane ke liye dhanyavad.
Thank you very much for joining us. India has recorded a significant reduction in multidimensional poverty. What are the lessons going forward for India and the other parts of the world?
In fact, the latest report was recently launched, and this is a collaboration led by Niti Aayog for the India Multidimensional Poverty Index, together with the UN, UNDP in particular, and the Oxford Poverty Initiative as well. So the latest report shows very important, tremendous progress in poverty reduction. We see that nearly around 135 million people, 13.5 crore people have been lifted out of poverty in the last 5 years. And when we look at the scale, this is more than the population of, say, France and the UK combined. If we look back a little bit as well, this continues a trend. We've seen over 400 million people lifted out of poverty in the last, say, 16 years or so. And also importantly, we see the pace of improvement being the fastest in the poorest states. That's a really important takeaway. I just returned from Madhya Pradesh, from Bhopal, where we had an event looking at these results with the chief minister, with civil society, and in fact we saw there that whereas I believe the national reduction in the number of people in multidimensional poverty was sort of 40% over this 5-year period. In Madhya Pradesh, it was around 44%. So that's another important aspect. The takeaways from this, I think, is that we see a direct relationship between targeted initiatives, the initiatives of the government of India on water and sanitation, on clean cooking fuel, nutrition, electricity hookups, financial inclusion on the basis of digital public infrastructure, together with states. So obviously, India being a federal sort of structure, it's been really, really important to see, and Madhya Pradesh is one example, to see how these two, the center and the state level, are working together to deliver these results.
On a related note, how can India and the world accelerate progress on SDGs or Sustainable Development Goals?
You know, we do have to recognize that we're at a moment of crisis. In fact, the Secretary General has been calling for a global SDG stimulus plan to rescue the SDGs. And, we see that globally only about a third, or actually only 12%, let's say, of the SDGs are actually on progress, on track. 50% off track, and for a fully third are either on track or actually following behind, especially in the last couple of years with this poly crisis that we're facing. Now, when the Secretary General was here in India at the end of last year, he noted that India is actually the country that can make the SDGs a reality. And this is based on two considerations. One is looking at the pace of change and progress, as we've just discussed. Two is the scale and the numbers here in India, the youngest, the largest youth generation in history, more young minds to tap than any country has ever had before. And we estimate upwards of almost half of some of the global goals need to be delivered here in India. So that's where we look at these programs. I know we use the phrase Jan Andolan, trying to create this mass movements, right? But universal electrification, the Swachh Bharat, the Jal Jeevan, bringing millions of people into banking, especially women, financial inclusion of women, the targeted public delivery system, the food, the ability to use, to connect old-fashioned development with cutting-edge digital infrastructure. We saw the ability, to respond with resilience in the face of COVID, getting food and getting, money into bank accounts quickly and in a flexible way. So these are important, leadership moments. India, I would also note, is increasingly driving the global conversation on climate action, climate change. We saw India's Panchamrit commitments at COP26. Truly ambitious commitments, 500 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030. This will require huge, heavy lifting in partnership between government and the private sector in particular. And the results, we're seeing the results. I think there's been a fourfold increase in renewable energy sort of capacities here in less than a decade in India. 11 times increase in the amount of solar power capacity and generation in just the last 5 years. We look at the Indian private sector, massive investments in renewables, $200 billion, if I'm not mistaken, sort of committed along those lines. Electric mobility, electric vehicles. I mean, one of my favorite games now to play, I've been in India just for a year and a half. When I arrived in Delhi, it didn't exist, the concept of an electric auto rickshaw, the three-wheeler. Now we see blue ones, driving around, more and more popping up. It's a fun game to kind of try and spot them. So in a couple of years from now, you can imagine that there's going to be just, all kinds of electric vehicles all over the country. These are really, really exciting developments, and the pace is what's so important.
So if we were to sum up, what could be the role of private sector in advancing development in India?
Look, I think that it's all about the private sector, really, ultimately, and that's not just India. That's every country across the world. We know that. The days when we thought that, for example, international development assistance was the key, even the multilateral development banks was the key, and even the day when we thought that public financing was the key. Of course, these are all very important, especially public financing, no doubt about it. But they're most important in terms of guiding private sector financing, of crowding in private sector financing and setting out the guardrails and these sorts of things. But at the end of the day, the private sector is both the engine and driver of the economy, and it will be the key to achieving the SDGs. Here in India, for example, we see an incredible demographic dividend. It's very few countries have ever had such an opportunity, and that faces India for the next coming couple of decades in terms of quite a young population, working age population, the dependency ratio of older and younger people not in the job market being very low. But to really yield the dividends of that demographic opportunity, for example, the private sector needs to create about 1 million jobs a month, if I'm not mistaken, to absorb the young people coming into the labor market. And again, adopting sustainability practices, not as, CSR is very important, philanthropy is very important, but what we've realized now is the real power of the private sector is adopting, circularity and sustainability into the core business practices and spreading that throughout the value chain. Now, we, of course, and the UN here, the UN in India, we're doing a lot of work with different industries, from car manufacturing to the tea industry to, different industries to integrate both environmental and social sustainability, social inclusion practices. Even in some areas where you might not really think about it. We have a new partnership with the Teamworks. They do the Jaipur Literature Festival, for example, integrating sustainability into that kind of event areas. Or also IFA, the International India Film Academy Awards, same thing, trying to bring that to the industry-wide scale. Lakme Fashion Week, Circular Design Challenge. We're working with them to incentivize designers to integrate, again, environmental and social sustainability practices. So, I think India is bringing to the table, to the global table, a private sector that is absolutely primed to be a key driver of the SDGs for this second half, the next 7 years that we have to reach 2030.
How do you expect India to use its G20 presidency to advance the agenda of the global South amongst the G20 nations?
India has been, first of all, uniquely positioned, I think, to bring together different countries and different communities across the many divides that we see at the moment. There's no doubt about it. The world is in turmoil. We have the war in Ukraine. There's the political divides, all different directions. Again, we're facing this poly-crisis, climate change, all of these things. And so there's a lot of divide and kind of centrifugal forces in the world. So I think that India, we, the global community, were fortuitous that India assumed the presidency at this very moment. Doesn't make it easy by any chance. It's a very, very difficult kind of challenge. But I think India has been doing a really good job in terms of, and a very timely job in terms of putting the SDGs at the very forefront of the global financial conversation, the G20 being largely a financial body. And in fact, so much so that I've been calling India's presidency this G20 an SDG20, because truly they've worked hard to put in the SDG stimulus in there to prioritize things like women-led development, just green transitions, and recognizing that when we say just green transition, unfortunately, it can't yet be just green in the sense of only green. We have to understand the transition of industries. We have to understand the right to development of developing countries and poor communities within countries. We have to understand that communities in India, coastal communities, agricultural communities, and across the global South especially are being majorly impacted already by climate change. We look at the weather, we realize that it's just getting worse. So we have to invest in resilience also, and building the resilience for those communities. And here I would just say that India is this leadership in the G20, the presidency, is very much part of a broader story, which is India's growing role in terms of becoming a provider of development solutions for other countries. And we in the UN here, we're increasingly helping identify emerging Indian best practice, development best practice, taking that the other direction to the international community. So it's really a two-way partnership. But India has been doing already a lot to support other countries. We have the India-UN Development Partnership Fund, which is running a lot of projects in different places. India has created and that's the South-South cooperation model. India has created the International Solar Alliance, helping bring investment to developing countries for renewables. The Coalition on Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, again, helping especially poor countries build infrastructure to save lives in the face of those disasters that happen in any case. And now I think this G20 has really been an important platform for India to bring the voice and the needs of the global South to the top table, fight for those needs and for those rights. Again, not easy, but I'm very optimistic that we'll have a great result, including a G20 SDG Acceleration Action Plan at the Delhi Summit in September, which then literally handshakes with the Global SDG Summit in New York. There's literally 8 days in between the two. So that will bring really very, very important momentum to the global conversation.
I'm afraid because of the time, I'll have to close here. I would like to thank you very much for touching so many important issues in such a brief span. Thanks a lot for joining us, sir. Thank you. Very kind of you.
Thank you so much.
We hope you liked this program. This program is also live streamed on All India Radio and aired on community radio stations. We look forward to your feedback on our WhatsApp number 98181 20554. For participation in this program, write to us at sustainabilitykarma@gmail.com. You may also connect with us on social media. This podcast is also available on podcasting hosting sites. Looking forward to meet you again at the same time next week with a new episode and a new guest. Till then, goodbye from all of us. Sustainability Karma, a podcast series with senior journalist and editor Rajiv Tikoo on sustainable development, sustainability and ESG.